the weekend. You're young and excited. You're meeting up with your friends in your local church youth group. You're ready to get on the bus and head out on a trip to a theme park just under 200 miles away. Ready for an exciting day of roller coasters and playing games and just having fun. No one could suspect the events that would unfold and lead to the worst drunk driving accident in U.S. history. So, what happened? I'm Andrew, and this is History's a Disaster. Tonight, we are taking a look into the Carrollton, Kentucky bus crash of 1988. A head-on collision caused by a drunk driver that claimed the lives of mostly high school-aged kids. This episode is brought to you by the Little Stripling Marshmallow Company, the perfect marshmallow to roast over your nice campfire. Now, on the morning of May 14th, 1988, it was a warm and sunny day filled with promise. Teens were gathering at the Radcliffe First Assembly of God Church. The youth group was getting together to make the 170-mile trip to Kings Island Theme Park in Mason, Ohio for Church Day. Associate Pastor John Pierman would be driving along with youth pastor Chuck Chiata and two other adults, Joy Williams, the church's music director, and her friend Janie Paget would help chaperone that day. And they would need all the help they could get. More kids were showing up than they expected. The bus was at full capacity with 4 adults and 63 kids, the youngest of which was 10 years old. They would spend most of the day into the evening riding roller coasters, playing games, spending the money they had as they enjoyed the day with their friends. They got back on the bus as evening was falling. It was going to be a long drive home. Some of the kids talked, others napped as the bus droned on going down the road. A helium balloon bounced in the breeze from an open window. Karen Foran pulled the balloon down and used it as a pillow as she tried to nap. While they enjoyed their day out, Larry Wayne Mahoney was enjoying his. Except, he chose to enjoy his day with beer. Larry has often been described as a quiet, hard-working man, but on May 14th, he had spent the day drinking at the bar before heading to some friend's house to drink some more. And while he was clearly drunk, his friends did take his keys from him and only returned them when he promised to drive straight home. He did not. Instead, he chose to go drink some more and pick up another 12-pack for the road. He then proceeded to head north on I-71 before cutting through the grass median and heading into the southbound lanes. He narrowly avoided hitting 14 vehicles as he sped up the highway in the wrong direction, dodging and passing cars and semis. He, however, did not miss the bus. The truck hit the bus on the right-hand side near the main side door of the bus before spinning out and slamming into another car that was thrown across the median before coming to a complete stop. The bus skidded to a stop after the collision. Shaken and in shock, the kids in the back were thrown into the seats in front of them on impact. Some hit the floor of the bus as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. Before they could make sense of anything, a whoosh filled the bus with intense heat as a fire started near the front of the bus. Chaos erupted immediately as the kids started screaming and trying to get out. With the front quickly going up in flames, the only choices they had was the rear exit or the windows. Those hard as fuck to open windows that typically required 3 hands to open. And even if you did manage to get them open, they did not open very far. One of the chaperones was able to make it out an already open window, but most of the kids chose to head to the rear exit. They just had to make it down the narrow aisle the aisle that was partially blocked by coolers and other debris that had spilled into the aisles or climbed over seats. In the narrow space, the crowd of panicked kids began to crush into each other. Some tripped and fell where their friends would crawl over them in their haste to get out. Once outside, a few would turn to help pull people out of the bus and the crush that had started. Christy Pierman had hesitated getting out of the bus. Her dad was driving and she couldn't see him. The heat in the bus was getting worse. The seats were burning the skins off the hands of anyone who touched them. Jack Armstrong, a witness to the crash that had been driving in the northbound lane, stopped to help along with residents from nearby houses. They helped pull the kids out and got the injured taken to the grassy median to wait for paramedics. Karen Foran suffered extreme burns over her arms and neck when the helium balloon in her lap exploded. Others were so badly burned that rescuers didn't know if it was a boy or a girl they were pulling from the bus. Hair was burned away, and their skin was burnt and falling off. Kentucky State Police and the Campbellsburg Fire Department arrived within minutes of being called. The school bus was completely engulfed. Flames were shooting out of the rear exit door as the firefighters fought to put out the burning bus. Paramedics and medical personnel were quickly brought in to start triage on the injured. A medevac chopper from the nearby Humana Hospital, along with 10 ambulances, worked to get the wounded brought to the hospital. One of the rescue volunteers was the first to approach the pickup that had caused the accident. Its roof was caved in almost flat, but the driver was alive and laying across the front seat. He found the driver's ID along with 3 cans of Miller Lite, 2 full and 1 almost empty. A blood test an hour and a half after the crash showed his blood alcohol content to be 0.24. The legal limit in Kentucky at the time was 0.1. So an hour and a half after the accident, his blood alcohol was still 2.5 times the legal limit. When the Carroll County coroner James Dunn arrived, he turned his attention to the now smoking ruins of the bus. A noticeably distraught firefighter stood guard at the ruined rear door. Dunn entered the still hot bus and was immediately assaulted with the smell of burnt rubber and upholstery, and on top of it, the smell of burning skin and hair. After a quick sweep with his flashlight at the nightmare scene, he quickly exited and shut the door. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. But he had a job to do, and he had to go back in there. He had to evaluate the scene and note the burnt bodies stacked on top of each other or draped over the backs of seats where they had tried to escape. It was a ghoulish scene. While they needed to start the investigation immediately, they decided it would take too long, and the nature of the scene was too graphic that it could not be done on scene with all the survivors, onlookers, and media on site. Cranes and a flatbed truck were brought in to remove the bus to the National Guard Armory at Carrollton. State Medical Examiner George Nichols began going through the bus. 27 people were missing, but they could only account for 26. It would take multiple searches before they finally found the last missing person hidden under a seat. The team had to work slowly to remove the bodies from the bus. The heat had fused some of the bodies together or to the seats and floor of the bus. They worked their way starting from the back, cutting out seats as they worked their way forward to make room. It was gut-wrenching and heartbreaking work. They had to stop every 15 minutes to cry and collect themselves before returning to it. Back in Radcliffe, parents were unaware of what happened as they gathered at the church to wait for the kids. When they heard there was an accident, they suspected it to be relatively minor and it would just be a short delay. They figured the kids were on an old school bus. They couldn't have been safer, right? What's safer than a bus? Shortly after midnight, the calls started coming in from survivors on how bad it actually was. Reverend Don Tennyson called up church board members and volunteers to start manning the phones, answering calls and making calls to the state police and hospital to get more information. It would take until nearly 3 a.m. before they learned the true horror of the accident. They heard how the bus had burnt and there was at least 18 dead. More information slowly trickled in on who had survived and what hospitals they were in. Parents and family members slowly drifted off from the church as they learned where their kids were. Others waited, clinging to the hope their kids were okay. By 6 a.m., they were desperate as they were called into the church and met by a police officer. Their kids had not been found, and they'd need to go in vans with the police up to Carrollton to help in identification. On the ride, they were asked to write down what they could remember of what the kids were wearing: clothing, jewelry, anything out of the ordinary. And if they had dental records, or could remember things like whether or not they had cavities. Still in shock, most of the parents had no idea why they were being asked such strange questions. When they arrived, George Nichols told them they would not be allowed to see the kids, that they needed to remember them how they had seen them last. The identification of the bodies would be difficult. 23 would be identified by dental records, 2 by physical features, and the rest by personal items like jewelry. Autopsies on all 27 would be completed by the following evening. On Monday, during a press conference, Nichols released they had all died of smoke inhalation. It was a small white lie to ease some of the parents. He did not want them to think of their kids alive and burning to death. The injuries from the accident ranged from minor to severe. The worst injuries happened to those closer to the front of the bus, with the exception of Karen. She sustained burns over 60% of her body when the helium balloon in her lap exploded and caught fire. Her right hand was burnt to the bone. Flesh and muscle and tendon were just gone. Her vocal cords were severely damaged by the heat. She would have to go through 14 surgeries just on her voice box and vocal cords. Dennis Perlman Jr. was severely burnt and had to endure multiple skin grafts over most of his body. Carrie Orant's leg was so badly burnt from being in the front of the bus there was no saving it, and they would end up having to amputate her leg. Carroll County Attorney John Aikman Jr. announced during a press conference that James Mahoney would be charged with 27 counts of capital murder and would seek the death sentence, which would receive some backlash when there was considerable public support for Mahoney, and was publicly forgiven by some of the survivors. Others absolutely hated him. Public opinion was very divided. In the end, he would be charged with 27 counts of second-degree manslaughter, 16 counts of second-degree assault, and 27 counts of wanton endangerment. He would be found guilty and sentenced to 16 years in prison. He was released after 10 years and 11 months on parole and has since avoided speaking of the accident. But Mahoney's part in this tragedy is only half the story. No one was killed due to the collision. The fire had claimed every life. So why did this bus burst into flames? During the investigation, the NTSB believes that during the crash, a leaf spring broke loose and punctured the fuel tank. The unprotected fuel tank that lies just below the first 3 rows of seats and behind the front door. They had just filled up the tank before the crash, so it was nearly full with 57 gallons of gas in the tank. After the tank was punctured, either sparks from metal dragging on the road or the hot end of the leaf spring ignited the tank. Once the fire started, it quickly spread, aided by materials on the bus. Materials like the helium balloon and cans of hairspray some of the girls carried. But the main source was the seats. The plastic seat covers and cushions helped spread the flames as well as giving off hydrogen chloride gas, a toxic byproduct that added a lot of smoke and made it even more difficult to breathe as the bus burned. Now, back in the 70s, there was a major call to make the school buses safer, specifically in 1977 regarding these fuel tanks. The changes called for a guard to be installed around the tank to protect it in case of an accident. Ford, the maker of the bus, was completely ready to comply with all the new standards that were being put into place. However, they were going to wait until the last minute to make the buses to the new legal standard. And since they put it off until the new changes went into effect, many buses were built without the guard around the fuel tank. Buses like the one in the accident, which was built just 8 days before the changes went into effect. The chassis of the bus had the holes in it for the guard, but at the time, it was considered an optional extra, and schools, always looking to save a few bucks, didn't spend money on extras. Ford would be sued within weeks of the crash, and a settlement was reached with most of the families. 2 families did not take the settlement and kept on fighting. They did not want the flaws in the buses to be forgotten. The country was already focusing on it being the worst drunk driving accident and ignoring the problems with the buses. While they would eventually win, they failed to convince Ford to do something about the buses still in service. Improvements would come from this though. Shortly after the accident, Kentucky began offering free safety inspections for privately owned buses like that used by the church. The state would also introduce requirements for 9 emergency exits on school buses, more than in any other state. They also required a cage for the fuel tank, a stronger frame, extra seat padding, flame retardant seats and floors, a fuel system that will slow leaks, along with other safety features. Many other state and local agencies would end up following suit. Many of the survivors and family members would go on to fight against drunk driving, with a few becoming prominent members in Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. A black marble memorial to the accident is now on display at the North Hardin Memorial Garden Cemetery, along with a green sign marking the accident site along the highway. And that was the Carrollton, Kentucky bus crash of 1988, the worst drunk driving accident in U.S. history. And you know what? I absolutely hate that that is how it is known. Yes, drunk driving is bad. Way too many people have died because of some shithead's decision to get behind the wheel of a car drunk. But regardless of the drunk driving, this was bound to happen. These buses were essentially mobile bombs just waiting for the spark needed to go off. Had Ford gone ahead and added these fuel tank guards, this would have been a relatively minor accident. Sure, the kids would have gotten some bumps and bruises, but they would still be alive today. Thanks for listening, and if you liked the show, please consider leaving a rating or review on your app of choice, and you can reach the show at historiesofdisaster@gmail.com with questions, comments, or suggestions. And follow the show on social media like Facebook or Instagram, and a few others. And share the episode. Take care of yourself out there. Life is short. Tomorrow is never guaranteed, so chase that dream. Shoot your shot. Kiss the girl. Live for the day, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Thanks and goodbye.